My name is Alex Rodriguez, and this is the story of how my older brother tried to embarrass me at his company party by calling me unemployed in front of 4 people who work directly for me. What makes this even more incredible is that he had no idea he was introducing me to my own team, and they had no idea their mystery CEO was standing right there in a thrift store suit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Millennium Tower Rooftop Lounge buzzed with the kind of energy that only comes from mixing expensive wine with corporate networking. Chicago's skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, while Peterson Associates celebrated another successful year with their annual client appreciation party. I stood near the entrance in my best Target blazer, feeling completely out of place among the sea of tailored suits and designer dresses. Ryan had invited me 3 weeks ago during one of our awkward family dinners, probably out of guilt more than genuine desire for my company. My older brother thrived in environments like this, where his charismatic smile and firm handshake could work their magic on potential clients. He was the golden child who'd graduated with honors, landed a prestigious marketing job straight out of college, and climbed the corporate ladder with the kind of determination that made our parents beam with pride every time they mentioned his name to neighbors. I watched him from across the room, holding court near the bar with a group of executives, his laugh carrying over the jazz quartet playing softly in the corner. Everything about Ryan screamed success, from his perfectly styled hair to his Italian leather shoes. He belonged here in a way I never would. Or at least, that's what everyone in our family believed. The invitation had surprised me. Ryan and I weren't exactly close, not since high school when our paths diverged so dramatically. While he'd focused on student government and networking events, I'd spent my time in the computer lab, building websites for local businesses, and dreaming of creating something bigger. Our parents had made it clear which approach they preferred, constantly asking when I'd get a real job and stop playing around with computers all day. I had arrived early, hoping to grab a quiet drink before the crowd thickened, but the place was already packed with Chicago's marketing elite. The guest list read like a who's who of advertising executives, creative directors, and business development managers, all mingling with the easy confidence that comes from years of professional success. I recognized several faces from LinkedIn profiles and industry magazines, people who commanded 6-figure salaries and managed teams across multiple cities. What they didn't know, what nobody in this room except me knew, was that 2 weeks ago I'd signed papers that would change my life forever. Streamline Logic Solutions, the company I'd built from my converted garage over the past 4 years, had just been acquired by Tech Global Corp for $85 million. The deal was still under strict NDA, with lawyers on both sides ensuring that not a single detail leaked before the official announcement planned for next month. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. While Ryan spent his days creating PowerPoint presentations about customer engagement strategies, I'd built software that automated workflow processes for companies across 3 continents. My team of 45 employees worked remotely from locations spanning 12 time zones, creating solutions that had quietly revolutionized how businesses manage their operations. We'd grown from 0 to 20 million in annual revenue without a single traditional marketing campaign, relying instead on word-of-mouth recommendations and the kind of organic growth that happens when you solve real problems for real people. But to my family, I was still the kid who dropped out of Northwestern after 2 years to pursue what they called, quote, computer hobbies. They knew I worked from home, spent long hours on video calls, and somehow managed to pay my bills. But the concept of a fully remote company was so foreign to their understanding of work that they'd simply categorized me as unemployed with unusual financial luck. I spotted Ryan making his way through the crowd, his megawatt smile growing brighter as he approached. Behind him trailed a small group of colleagues, their faces flushed with the kind of excitement that comes from schmoozing with the boss outside office hours. I recognized his strategy immediately, the same one he'd used since we were kids when he wanted to show off in front of friends. I was about to become a prop in his performance, the perfect contrast to highlight his own success. "Everyone, I want you to meet my little brother Alex," Ryan announced, his arm settling around my shoulder with practiced familiarity. The gesture felt rehearsed, like everything else about his public persona. "Alex is between opportunities right now. You know how the tech industry can be. Lots of ups and downs, feast or famine. The group nodded with polite sympathy, their expressions shifting to that careful neutrality people adopt when introduced to someone they immediately categorize as unsuccessful. I felt the familiar sting of Ryan's casual dismissal, the way he could reduce 4 years of grinding 14-hour days into a simple narrative of professional instability. "What kind of tech work do you do?" asked a woman in a sharp black pantsuit, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity mixed with professional caution. Her business card, which she'd handed to Ryan moments earlier, identified her as Jennifer Walsh, Senior Vice President at Morrison Digital Marketing. "I develop workflow automation software," I replied, keeping my answer deliberately vague. "Mostly back-end systems that help companies streamline their operations." Ryan laughed, the sound carrying just enough condescension to make my jaw tighten. "Alex has always been the creative one in the family. He's constantly working on these little projects, building apps and websites for whoever will pay him. Very entrepreneurial spirit, but you know how it is with freelancers. Never quite sure where the next paycheck is coming from." The freelancer comment hit exactly as Ryan intended. In a room full of people with stable corporate positions, comprehensive benefits packages, and predictable career trajectories, being labeled a freelancer was social death. I watched their faces shift from polite interest to sympathetic concern, the kind of expression reserved for people who'd chosen uncertainty over security. What made the moment even more surreal was recognizing some of the faces in the growing crowd around us. A tall man with salt and pepper hair standing near the windows looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place him. A woman in a burgundy dress kept glancing in our direction with an expression I couldn't quite read. The recognition was tickling the edge of my consciousness, like trying to remember a song when you can only recall the melody. "Well, there's certainly no shortage of opportunities in tech," offered another colleague, his tone carefully optimistic. "I'm sure something will come along soon." "Oh, I'm sure it will," Ryan agreed, giving my shoulder another squeeze. "Alex is incredibly talented, just needs to find the right fit. Maybe something more stable this time, you know? Something with a steady paycheck and normal business hours." The conversation continued to swirl around me, each well-meaning comment adding another layer to my supposed failure. Ryan was performing beautifully, playing the role of supportive older brother, while simultaneously establishing himself as the successful one, the stable one, the one who'd made all the right choices. It was a masterclass in subtle superiority, delivered with just enough warmth to seem caring rather than cruel. I found myself studying the faces around us more carefully, that nagging sense of recognition growing stronger. The tall man by the windows was definitely familiar, and now that I looked closer, so was the woman in burgundy. There was something about their posture, the way they held themselves, that reminded me of video calls and virtual meetings. My mind started connecting dots, pulling together fragments of memory from countless Zoom sessions and team presentations. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The tall man was Marcus Johnson, my operations manager. The woman in burgundy was Elena Martinez, my lead designer. Standing slightly behind them, nursing a craft beer, and looking distinctly uncomfortable in his navy suit, was David Park, my chief technology officer. All three of them were here as guests of Peterson Associates clients, companies that had hired them for various consulting projects without realizing they worked for the same organization. My remote team structure had created the perfect storm of mistaken identity. Marcus consulted for logistics companies through his personal LLC. Elena did freelance design work for agencies like Peterson and Associates. David provided technical advisory services to startups and established businesses. None of them had ever met each other in person, and none of them had ever seen me outside of carefully framed video calls, where my background was always a neutral wall in my home office. I was standing in the middle of a networking event, being introduced as an unemployed failure to 3 of my most trusted employees, and none of us recognized each other. The conversation around me continued, but I could barely process the words. Ryan was now explaining my situation to a wider audience, his voice carrying that particular tone he reserved for family stories that made him look good by comparison. He talked about my potential and how I just needed direction and stability, each word landing like a small knife between my ribs. The important thing is not to give up, he was saying to the group, which had grown to include at least 8 people now. Sometimes it takes a while to find your place in the world. Alex has always been a bit of a dreamer, very creative, but creativity doesn't always translate to commercial success, you know? Marcus shifted uncomfortably near the windows, and I wondered if something about Ryan's speech was bothering him. Elena was frowning slightly, her expression thoughtful in a way that made my stomach churn. David had moved closer to our group, though he seemed more interested in the conversation than in studying faces. The whole situation felt like something out of a fever dream. Here I was, listening to my brother explain my professional failures to my own employees, while simultaneously trying to process the impossible coincidence that had brought us all together in this exact moment. The NDA restrictions meant I couldn't reveal the acquisition, but even if I could, how would I explain that the unemployed man they were meeting was actually their boss? Ryan's performance was reaching its crescendo now, his voice taking on the inspirational tone he used during client presentations. But that's what family is for, right? Supporting each other through the rough patches. I keep telling Alex that Peterson Associates is always looking for bright people, even if they don't have traditional corporate experience. Maybe we could find something entry-level. You know? Get him started on the right path. The offer hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt every eye in the group focused on me, waiting for my response. This was the moment Ryan had been building toward, the grand gesture that would demonstrate his generosity while simultaneously cementing his position as the successful brother who could afford to help the struggling one. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again, still reeling from the surreal nature of the situation. Across the room, I noticed more familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd. Sarah Chen, my head of development, was engaged in an animated conversation with a group near the appetizer station. 2 of my senior engineers were chatting with what looked like potential clients near the jazz quartet. Streamline Logic Solutions had a distributed team spread across multiple cities, and apparently half of them had ended up at Peterson Associates' client appreciation party through various networking connections and consulting relationships. The coincidence was mathematically improbable, but here we were, all gathered under the same roof while remaining completely invisible to each other. Ryan was still waiting for my response. His preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Smile growing slightly strained as the silence stretched longer than socially comfortable. The group around us maintained their polite attention, but I could sense their energy beginning to shift toward other conversations, other networking opportunities that might prove more immediately valuable than listening to a successful marketing director try to help his unemployed brother. That's very generous of you, I finally managed, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. I'll definitely think about it. Great. Ryan's enthusiasm seemed genuine, though I caught the flash of relief in his eyes. He'd successfully delivered his lines, demonstrated his magnanimity, and could now move on to more important conversations. I'll send you some information about our current openings. Nothing too demanding, obviously, but enough to get you back on your feet. The group began to disperse naturally, conversations splitting off into smaller clusters as people pursued their individual networking agendas. Ryan was immediately pulled into a discussion about quarterly projections with Jennifer Walsh, leaving me standing alone near the bar with my thoughts spinning in increasingly frantic circles. I needed air, space to process what had just happened, and figure out how to navigate the rest of the evening without completely losing my mind. The rooftop terrace beckoned through glass doors, offering the promise of cooler temperatures and fewer witnesses to my mounting confusion. As I made my way toward the exit, I caught fragments of conversations that took on new meaning now that I recognized so many faces in the crowd. Elena was discussing user interface design with a creative director from a major agency. Marcus was explaining supply chain optimization to a group of logistics executives. David was deep in conversation about cybersecurity protocols with someone who looked like a Fortune 500 CTO. My employees were networking brilliantly, building relationships and expanding their professional circles, completely unaware that their actual boss was wandering around the same party being introduced as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing creative dreams without practical backup plans. The whole situation would have been funny if it weren't so personally devastating. 4 years of building something meaningful, of creating jobs and solving problems and changing how businesses operated, reduced to Ryan's narrative of familial disappointment and professional instability. The worst part was how easily everyone had accepted his version of events, how perfectly it aligned with their assumptions about people who worked outside traditional corporate structures. I pushed through the glass doors onto the terrace, grateful for the cool October air and the relative quiet. Chicago's skyline stretched out before me, a glittering reminder of all the ambition and innovation contained within the city's boundaries. Somewhere out there were the headquarters of companies that used my software, businesses that had streamlined their operations and increased their efficiency because of systems I'd designed and built. But here, 30 floors above the street, I was just Ryan Rodriguez's unsuccessful little brother, the family member who'd chosen uncertainty over stability, and was paying the predictable price for that choice. The irony was almost poetic. In less than 2 weeks, Tech Global Corp would announce the acquisition, and my name would appear in Forbes, TechCrunch, and every major business publication as one of the year's most successful young entrepreneurs. But tonight, in this room full of marketing professionals, I was nobody special, just another cautionary tale about the dangers of dreaming too big without practical skills to back it up. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages, finding the usual mix of congratulations from lawyers, integration planning updates from the Tech Global team, and scheduling requests from journalists who wanted to interview me about the acquisition. The contrast between my digital life and my physical reality felt like existing in two completely different universes simultaneously. A notification popped up from our company Slack channel, where Elena had posted a photo from inside the party with the caption, "Networking like a boss at this Peterson Associates event." So many potential partnerships in one room. The photo showed Marcus and David in the background, both looking slightly overwhelmed by the formal atmosphere, but gamely working the room, like the professionals they were. My team was thriving at an event where I'd been relegated to the role of family disappointment, and none of us had any idea we were sharing the same space. The situation was beyond surreal, crossing into territory that would be rejected as too implausible for fiction. I stayed on the terrace for nearly 20 minutes, watching the city lights and trying to process the emotional whiplash of the evening. Part of me wanted to march back inside and announce the truth, to watch Ryan's face as he realized he'd just offered an entry-level position to someone who'd just sold a company for more money than he'd earn in 3 lifetimes. But the NDA restrictions made that impossible, and even without legal constraints, the revelation would create more problems than it solved. Instead, I found myself thinking about the deeper implications of what had happened. Ryan's dismissal wasn't just personal cruelty. It was a perfect example of how society values appearance over substance, how we measure success through visible markers rather than actual achievement. My remote work structure, my casual dress code, my preference for building rather than networking had made me invisible to traditional success metrics, allowing my own brother to genuinely believe I was unemployed despite generating more revenue than his entire department. When I finally returned to the party, the energy had shifted into full networking mode. Business cards were being exchanged with military precision, deals were being discussed over appetizers, and connections were being forged that would influence Chicago's marketing landscape for years to come. I watched my employees continue their excellent work, building relationships and expanding their professional networks, while their actual employer remained hidden in plain sight. Ryan found me near the end of the evening, his face flushed with the success of what had clearly been a profitable night for Peterson Associates. "Great party," I told him honestly, because despite everything, I had to admire the networking opportunities he'd created. "Told you it would be worth coming," he replied, his earlier condescension replaced by genuine warmth now that his performance was complete. "And hey, I meant what I said about those job opportunities. I'll email you some openings next week." "I appreciate that," I said, meaning it more than he could possibly understand. The evening had given me insights into his world, his values, and his genuine desire to help, even if that help came wrapped in assumptions that couldn't have been more wrong. As guests began filtering toward the elevators, I noticed my employees gathering their coats and saying their goodbyes. Elena was exchanging contact information with several new connections. Marcus had what looked like a promising conversation with a potential client. David was already planning follow-up meetings based on the contacts he'd made. They'd accomplished exactly what they'd come here to do, building relationships, and expanding opportunities for growth. The fact that their boss had spent the evening being introduced as an unemployed failure was just another layer of irony in a night that had redefined the word impossible. I left the party with my head spinning, my emotions ricocheting between hurt and amusement, frustration and gratitude. In less than 2 weeks, everything would change. The acquisition would be announced, my story would become public, and the narrative around my success would shift permanently. But for now, I was still just Alex Rodriguez, the brother who'd chosen uncertainty over stability, creativity over conformity, and innovation over tradition. And maybe, I thought as I walked toward the parking garage, that wasn't the worst thing to be, even if it made family gatherings more complicated than they needed to be. The real test would come when the truth finally emerged, when Ryan realized that his unemployed little brother had just become one of Chicago's most successful young entrepreneurs. Would he be proud, embarrassed, or something more complicated that combined elements of both? I suspected I was about to find out, and despite everything that had happened tonight, I found myself looking forward to that conversation more than I probably should have. The next morning arrived, with the kind of crisp October clarity that makes Chicago feel alive with possibility. I sat in my home office, converted garage still smelling faintly of motor oil despite 4 years of computers and whiteboards, staring at an email that would change everything. The subject line read, Final Approval Public Announcement Schedule, and the sender was Margaret Chen, Tech Global Corp's Chief Communications Officer. The acquisition announcement had been moved up by 10 days due to market conditions and quarterly reporting schedules. Instead of waiting until the end of the month, the news would break this Thursday morning across all major business publications. 4 days from now, my quiet existence as Ryan's unemployed little brother would explode into a very public narrative about entrepreneurial success and the changing face of American business. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan that made my coffee taste suddenly bitter. Great seeing you last night. Talked to HR this morning about those entry-level openings. Can you come in Wednesday for an informal interview? Nothing too serious, just want to see if there's a good fit. The timing was almost too perfect to believe. Ryan wanted to interview me for an entry-level position at Peterson Associates on Wednesday. Tech Global would announce my $85 million exit on Thursday. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. I spent the day walking around Oak Park, trying to process the emotional complexity of what was about to unfold. Part of me felt guilty for the deception, even though it hadn't been intentional. Ryan genuinely wanted to help what he perceived as his struggling brother, and his offer came from a place of family loyalty rather than malicious superiority. But another part of me burned with years of accumulated frustration at being consistently underestimated, dismissed, and categorized as the family disappointment. The call came Tuesday evening while I was reviewing integration documents with the Tech Global legal team. Ryan's name flashed on my screen just as I was wrapping up a discussion about employee retention bonuses and equity distributions. Hey Alex, quick question about tomorrow. Ryan's voice carried that particular energy he got when orchestrating professional situations. I know we said informal, but Jennifer Walsh from Morrison Digital is going to sit in on our chat. She's been looking for someone with tech experience for their client services team, and I thought it might be good for you to meet her. Jennifer Walsh, the same senior vice president who'd listened to Ryan explain my professional failures at the party. The woman who'd nodded sympathetically when he described my freelance instability and creative impracticality. Now she wanted to interview me for what was undoubtedly a junior position designed for someone who needed guidance and structure. That sounds great, I heard myself saying, marveling at how easily the words came. What time should I be there? 2:00. Dress professionally, you know. First impressions matter in this business. After hanging up, I sat in my garage office surrounded by monitors displaying real-time analytics from software systems running in 17 countries, and laughed until my sides hurt. Tomorrow I would put on my best interview outfit and let Ryan's colleague evaluate my suitability for an entry-level marketing position. Thursday morning, those same people would read about my acquisition in the Wall Street Journal over their breakfast coffee. Wednesday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes office buildings feel like refuges from the outside world. I chose my outfit carefully, the same Target blazer from the party paired with khakis and dress shoes that had seen better days. The goal was to look respectable but not threatening, eager but not overconfident, exactly what they'd expect from someone grateful for the opportunity. Peterson Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the Loop, all exposed brick and industrial lighting designed to convey creative authenticity within corporate structure. Ryan met me in the lobby, his smile warm and slightly nervous in the way that suggested he'd already invested personal capital in recommending me. "Ready for this?" he asked as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. "Jennifer's really excited to meet you. I talked up your technical background, mentioned how you've been freelancing with various software projects. She thinks there might be a good fit with their digital transformation initiatives." The elevator opened into Peterson Associates' reception area, all carefully curated artwork and motivational quotes about innovation and collaboration. Ryan guided me through an open floor plan where young professionals bent over laptops and clustered around whiteboards covered with campaign strategies and client timelines. The energy was familiar but different from my remote team's dynamic, more performative and location-dependent. Jennifer Walsh's office occupied a corner position with views of Lake Michigan and walls covered with awards from advertising industry organizations. She rose from behind a desk that could have served as a small conference table, her handshake firm and her smile professional but warm. "Alex, so good to see you again," she said, gesturing toward a seating area with 2 leather chairs and a coffee table. "Ryan's told me wonderful things about your technical background. We're always looking for people who can bridge the gap between traditional marketing and digital innovation." I settled into one of the chairs, hyper-aware of the theater we were performing. Jennifer had already categorized me based on Ryan's introduction at the party, and this interview would either confirm or challenge her preconceptions about my capabilities and potential value to her organization. "Tell me about your experience with software development," she began, pulling out a legal pad and expensive pen. "Ryan mentioned you've been working on various projects. What kind of systems have you built?" The question was perfectly innocent, but it opened a door I could walk through carefully, or blow off its hinges entirely. I chose the careful approach, describing Streamline Logic's core functionality without mentioning the company name, client base, or recent acquisition. I talked about workflow automation, process optimization, and user interface design in general terms that conveyed competence without revealing the scale of what I'd actually accomplished. Jennifer took notes steadily, her expression shifting from polite attention to genuine interest as I explained technical concepts with the kind of fluency that can't be faked. Ryan sat slightly behind her, his face showing growing surprise as he realized his unemployed brother actually knew what he was talking about when it came to software development. "That's really impressive," Jennifer said when I finished describing a client management system that happened to be running the operations of a Fortune 500 company. "How many people have you worked with on these projects?" Another loaded question. The honest answer was 45 full-time employees, plus dozens of contractors and consultants. But that would require explanations I couldn't give without violating my NDA restrictions. "I've managed teams of varying sizes," I said instead. "Mostly remote collaborations with developers, designers, and project managers across different time zones. The distributed work model has become really effective for technology projects." "Remote management experience is valuable," Jennifer agreed, making another note. "A lot of our clients are asking about distributed teams and virtual collaboration. Someone who understands those dynamics could be really helpful for our consulting services." The conversation continued for 45 minutes, covering technical skills, project management experience, and client relationship strategies. Jennifer's questions grew increasingly sophisticated as she realized she wasn't interviewing a desperate freelancer, but someone with substantial expertise in areas her company was actively trying to develop. Ryan's expression shifted throughout the discussion, pride mixing with confusion as he processed this version of his brother. The Alex sitting in Jennifer's office bore little resemblance to the struggling creative he'd described at the party, and I could see him trying to reconcile these conflicting narratives. "I have to ask," Jennifer said as the interview wound down, "what are you looking for in terms of position and compensation?" Based on your experience, you might be overqualified for some of our entry-level openings. The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could see Ryan's slight panic as he realized his generous offer to help might have been based on completely incorrect assumptions about my qualifications and market value. I'm interested in finding the right fit, I said diplomatically. Compensation is obviously important, but I'm more focused on working with people who understand technology's role in business transformation. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. Well, let me talk to our team about some possibilities. We might have opportunities that would be more appropriate for your skill level than what Ryan initially described. After the interview, Ryan walked me back to the elevator in thoughtful silence. As the doors closed and we descended toward the lobby, he finally spoke. Alex, I have to say that went way better than I expected. You really know your stuff when it comes to this tech material. Jennifer was impressed, I could tell. Thanks for setting it up, I replied, meaning it sincerely despite the strange circumstances. She seems like someone who really understands the industry. I guess I didn't realize how much you've learned over the past few years, Ryan continued, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. Maybe this freelance thing has been more successful than I thought. The elevator reached the lobby, and we walked toward the street entrance together. Rain was still falling steadily, turning the city into an impressionist painting of blurred lights and reflected surfaces. Listen, Ryan said as we stood under the building's awning. Regardless of what happens with Jennifer's team, I'm proud of you for putting yourself out there. I know I've been kind of dismissive about your work sometimes, and that wasn't fair. You're obviously good at what you do. The apology caught me off guard, its sincerity cutting through all the complicated emotions I'd been carrying since the party. This was the brother I remembered from childhood, before career pressures and family expectations had turned us into competitors rather than allies. I appreciate that, I said, and meant it completely. We parted ways at the corner, Ryan heading back to his office and me walking toward the parking garage where I'd left my 5-year-old Honda Civic. Tomorrow morning would bring the announcement that would reframe everything about our relationship, but for now, we'd found a moment of genuine connection that felt more valuable than any amount of money. That evening, I sat in my favorite coffee shop, Brew and Bites, reviewing the final press release that would transform me from Ryan's unemployed brother into Alex Rodriguez, founder and former CEO of Streamline Logic Solutions. The language was corporate, but the numbers were staggering. $85 million acquisition, 45 employees, $20 million in annual revenue, clients across 3 continents. Margaret Chen had sent detailed media schedules that would begin with the Wall Street Journal at 6 a.m. Eastern, followed by TechCrunch, Forbes, and eventually local Chicago business publications. By noon tomorrow, my story would be circulating through the same professional networks that had witnessed Ryan's casual dismissal of my career just 5 days earlier. My phone buzzed with messages from team members who'd been briefed about the announcement timing. Elena Martinez sent a group text to our leadership team saying, "Can't wait for everyone to finally know who we really work for." Marcus Johnson had scheduled celebration drinks for the weekend, while David Park was already planning technical integration strategies with the tech global development teams. The surreal nature of the past week was reaching its crescendo. My employees had attended Ryan's company party, networked successfully with Chicago's marketing elite, and returned to work energized by new professional connections. Meanwhile, their boss had been introduced as an unemployed failure, and subsequently interviewed for an entry-level position at the same firm where they'd been treated as respected consultants. Thursday morning arrived with unusual warmth for late October, as if the city itself was celebrating new beginnings. I woke up early and made coffee, then opened my laptop to watch the announcement unfold across social media and business news platforms. The Wall Street Journal piece went live at exactly 6 a.m., followed within minutes by coordinated releases from Tech Global's communications team. The headline read, "Tech Global acquires workflow automation startup Streamline Logic for $85 million, with a subheading that made my hands shake slightly. Remote-first company built by 32-year-old Chicago entrepreneur represents growing trend in distributed business models. My photo accompanied the article, a professional headshot taken by Tech Global's media team that bore little resemblance to the rumpled figure Ryan had introduced at the party. The accompanying interview covered my background, the company's growth trajectory, and my vision for the future of remote work. It was everything I'd worked toward for 4 years, distilled into 800 words that would redefine how the business world saw both me and Streamline Logic. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. LinkedIn notifications flooded my phone as former classmates, industry contacts, and complete strangers began connecting and congratulating. Twitter mentions multiplied exponentially, as tech journalists and business analysts shared this story with commentary about acquisition trends and remote work success stories. But the message I was waiting for came at 9:30 a.m., just as I was reviewing interview requests from 3 different podcasts and a television business program. Holy shit, Alex. Holy shit. Is this real? Are you the Alex Rodriguez from the Wall Street Journal? My unemployed brother just sold a company for $85 million. Call me right now. Ryan's text message was followed immediately by a phone call that I let go to voicemail while I processed the emotional complexity of the moment. The voicemail was 30 seconds of incoherent questioning, mixed with what sounded like genuine excitement and possibly some hurt at being kept in the dark. I called him back an hour later, after the initial media frenzy had settled into a manageable rhythm of interview scheduling and congratulatory messages. Alex, Ryan answered on the first ring, his voice carrying emotions I couldn't immediately identify. I just read the entire Wall Street Journal article twice. $85 million? Streamline Logic Solutions? You built all of this while I was offering you entry-level marketing jobs? It's been a long 4 years, I said simply, not sure how else to begin explaining the journey from garage startup to major acquisition. But why didn't you tell me? Tell any of us? Mom and Dad think you work part-time for some website company. They have no idea you're running a business with 45 employees and $20 million in revenue. The hurt in his voice was unmistakable now, and I realized that my secrecy had created its own kind of damage. While I'd been protecting myself from family skepticism and premature judgment, I'd also denied them the opportunity to be proud, to celebrate, to understand who I'd become. The whole industry operates under NDAs, I explained. The acquisition has been in negotiation for 8 months, and I couldn't discuss it with anyone outside my legal team. Even my employees only learned about the timing yesterday. But before that, you've been building this company for 4 years and never mentioned the scale of what you were doing? The question cut deep because it forced me to confront my own assumptions about family support and understanding. I'd been so convinced that Ryan and my parents wouldn't comprehend or value what I was building that I'd simply stopped trying to explain it. Our family dinners had become exercises in deflection, where I'd answer questions about my work with vague generalities rather than risk their dismissal. I guess I thought you wouldn't understand, I admitted. The remote work model, the distributed teams, the software-as-a-service business model. It's also different from traditional corporate structures that I didn't know how to translate it into terms that would make sense. So you let me think you were unemployed? You let me offer you a job at my company while you were running a business worth $85 million? The conversation was heading toward territory that could either heal our relationship or damage it permanently. I could hear the confusion and embarrassment in Ryan's voice, but also something else that might have been pride fighting its way through the shock. I let you think what you were already thinking, I said gently. At the party on Friday, you introduced me as unemployed before I said anything about my work. You'd already decided what my story was based on how I looked and where I worked. Silence stretched across the phone line as Ryan processed the implications of what I'd said. The networking event that had seemed like such a triumph for him was now recontextualized as a moment where he'd publicly diminished someone whose professional accomplishments dwarfed his own. Jennifer Walsh called me an hour ago, he said finally. She wanted to know if I had any idea who you really were when I brought you in for that interview. Apparently her team has been using Streamline Logic software for client projects for the past 2 years. She recognized your name from the user licenses. The revelation added another layer of irony to an already surreal situation. Not only had Ryan interviewed me for an entry-level position, but he'd done so at a company that was already paying for my software. Jennifer Walsh had spent 45 minutes evaluating my suitability for junior marketing roles, while simultaneously using systems I'd designed and built. What did you tell her? I asked. The truth. That I had no idea. That my brother had apparently been running a major technology company while I was worried about him finding steady employment. Another pause. Then Ryan's voice shifted into something I hadn't heard from him in years. Genuine curiosity, rather than protective concern. Alex, can you help me understand something? How does someone build a $20 million business without anyone noticing? How do you manage 45 employees from a converted garage? How does this whole remote work thing actually function? The questions opened a door I'd been waiting to walk through for 4 years. For the next hour, I explained the distributed team model, the cloud-based infrastructure that allowed us to operate without a physical headquarters, and the project management systems that kept 45 people coordinated across 12 time zones. I described the client acquisition process, the software development lifecycle, and the financial metrics that had attracted Tech Global's acquisition team. Ryan listened with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for important client presentations, asking intelligent questions about scalability, quality control, and team dynamics. For the first time since we'd been adults, we were having a conversation about work that felt collaborative rather than competitive. "This is incredible," he said when I finished explaining our revenue growth trajectory. "And you built all of this without investors, without a traditional office, without any of the infrastructure I thought businesses needed to succeed?" "Different industries have different requirements," I replied. "Software companies can be location independent in ways that marketing firms can't, but the principles are the same. Solve real problems for real people, hire talented team members, and focus on sustainable growth rather than rapid expansion." "I owe you a massive apology," Ryan said, his voice heavy with something that sounded like regret. "Not just for the party, but for years of assuming I understood your situation when I clearly had no idea what you were building." The apology felt more significant than the Wall Street Journal article or the acquisition announcement. This was my brother recognizing that his dismissal had been based on ignorance rather than insight, that his offers of help had been condescending rather than supportive. "You couldn't have known," I said, meaning it. "I kept the details private, and remote work is still foreign to most people. Your assumptions made sense based on the information you had." "But that's just it," Ryan insisted. "I never asked for more information. I saw someone working from home in casual clothes and assumed that meant professional instability. I let stereotypes do my thinking instead of actually learning about what you were doing." The conversation shifted naturally toward our parents, who were apparently fielding phone calls from neighbors and former colleagues who'd seen the news coverage. Our mother had called Ryan in tears, not from disappointment but from pride mixed with confusion about why Alex had never explained the scope of his work. "They want to have dinner this weekend," Ryan said. "All of us together, so you can explain this streamline logic situation properly. Mom's been telling everyone at church that her son just sold a company for $85 million, but she has no idea what the company actually does." The image of our mother bragging about my success to the church congregation was both hilarious and touching. For years, she'd struggled to explain my work to friends and neighbors, defaulting to vague descriptions about computer consulting that left everyone more confused than informed. "I'd like that," I said. "It's probably time they understood what I've been building." "Jennifer wants to meet with you again, too," Ryan added. "Not for a job interview this time. She's interested in a consulting relationship between Streamline Logic and Morrison Digital. Apparently your workflow automation systems could solve some problems they've been struggling with for their enterprise clients." The prospect of working with Ryan's colleague on a professional level, as equals rather than as favor seeker and favor giver, felt like a meaningful step toward rebuilding our relationship on more solid ground. "That could be interesting," I said. "I'll have more flexibility for consulting work now that the acquisition is complete." We talked for another 30 minutes about practical matters, media interviews, family communications, and the inevitable curiosity from mutual friends who'd witnessed years of my supposed professional struggles. Ryan offered to help coordinate responses to local business publications that wanted to cover the hometown success story angle. As our conversation wound down, I realized that the past week had been about more than just a business acquisition or family dynamics. It had been a lesson in the dangers of assumptions, the importance of asking questions rather than accepting surface appearances, and the value of maintaining relationships even when they're complicated by misunderstanding. "Alex," Ryan said as we prepared to hang up, "I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. What you've built is incredible, and I'm sorry it took a Wall Street Journal article for me to realize it. Thanks, I replied, surprised by how much the words meant coming from him. And Ryan? Thanks for trying to help, even when you didn't understand what I was doing. The fact that you cared enough to offer me a job, even an entry-level one, means more than you probably realize. After we hung up, I sat in my garage office surrounded by the same monitors and whiteboards that had witnessed 4 years of late nights and breakthrough moments. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as streamline logic integrated with Tech Global's existing systems, and my team adapted to corporate structure. But today felt like an ending and a beginning simultaneously, the conclusion of one chapter and the opening of another. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena Martinez. Boss, I just realized something hilarious. Last Friday at that Peterson Associates party, some guy introduced his unemployed brother to a bunch of us. That unemployed brother was you, wasn't it? The message was followed by laughing emojis and a second text. Marcus figured it out too. We're all dying. You sat through that entire introduction without saying anything? You're either the most patient person alive or completely insane. I laughed out loud, alone in my garage office, as the absurdity of the past week finally hit me fully. My employees had figured out the connection, probably comparing notes about the familiar-looking man in the Target blazer, who'd been introduced as a cautionary tale about creative ambitions without practical skills. The story would become part of streamline logic folklore, the week their mystery CEO was introduced to them as an unemployed failure at their own networking event. It would be told at company retreats and new employee orientations, a perfect example of how assumptions can blind us to reality even when it's standing directly in front of us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.